What early American settlers slept on before beds existed. In the 17th and 18th century American colonies, an estimated 15% of settlers died annually in some years, severely impacting fledgling communities. Amid bitter winters and drafty cabins, many families slept directly on straw, leaves, or animal skins, not raised beds, and lacked durable bedding. That bare-bones setup contributed to widespread chills, respiratory ailments, and the spread of illness when combined with cramped shared sleeping quarters. In this video, we'll examine how early American settlers' sleeping practices shaped health, community, and survival on the frontier. Before beds as we know them existed, early American settlers had to make do with what was available in their harsh environments. The sleeping arrangements were utilitarian, reflecting both necessity and resourcefulness. Settlers would often gather whatever natural materials they could find to create a semblance of comfort. Straw, dried leaves, and even animal furs became common bedding materials. These options were not just for comfort, they were essential for survival against the chill of the night. In the small, cramped cabins where families lived, multiple members often shared the same sleeping space. In such close quarters, the lines between resting and living blurred. Each night was a routine that involved gathering around the hearth to share stories and warmth before finally settling down for the night. For a settler family like that of John and Mary, their evening rituals were steeped in both practicality and tradition. As the sun dipped below the horizon, John would close the cabin door, securing the family from the wilderness outside. The flickering candlelight cast shadows across the room as Mary prepared their beds. The children, Sarah and Tommy, would eagerly help, tossing together leaves and straw harvested during the day. This task, while necessary, was also a time of bonding, a ritual that marked the end of their laborious day. The bedding, though simple, was a source of pride. Mary would often reminisce about the comforts of her childhood home back in England, where she had a proper bed. But here, in the New World, comfort was a luxury. Instead, they relied on the warmth of their bodies and the closeness of family. Each person would nestle beneath layers of quilts sewn from fabric scraps, while a thin mattress of straw provided what little support they could manage. The cultural influences on their sleeping habits were evident. Many settlers had brought with them traditions from their European ancestors, merging them with the new realities of frontier life. In some households, the practice of sleeping by the fire became common, as families sought warmth and safety from wild animals. This not only affected their sleeping patterns, but also their health. Many settlers suffered from ailments due to inadequate bedding and exposure to the cold. As the children drifted off, lulled by the crackling fire, John and Mary would share hushed conversations about their dreams, aspirations, and the challenges that lay ahead. It was during these intimate moments that they found solace from the difficulties of their daily lives. In a different corner of the settlement, however, the sleeping arrangements varied. Some families opted for communal sleeping quarters where men and women slept apart, but children remained close to their parents. These shared spaces fostered a sense of community, where neighbors would rely on each other for support and security. The close-knit nature of these arrangements often created bonds that lasted a lifetime, even as the families grew and evolved. Yet, despite the communal practices, the settlers were not immune to health issues. The lack of proper bedding often led to complications like colds, fevers, and in some cases, more severe ailments due to poor sanitation and close proximity to one another. They relied heavily on herbal remedies and home cures, which were often passed down through generations. So, as we look back at these early settlers, we see a group of people resilient in the face of adversity, making do with what they had while carving out a life in a new land. Their sleeping arrangements, though rudimentary, were a testament to their spirit and ingenuity. As night fell deeper, the family huddled closer together, drifting into sleep, dreaming of a brighter tomorrow, a future where their children might sleep in proper beds, a luxury they longed to achieve. As the settlers nestled into their makeshift beds, the sounds of nature enveloped them. The chirping of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves filled the air, creating a soothing backdrop against the bustling life outside. John, the father, lay awake longer than the rest of his family, contemplating the challenges they faced in their new homeland. Despite the comfort of their straw-filled bedding, he worried about the dampness that seeped through the thin walls of their wooden cabin, especially during the unforgiving winters. Mary, his wife, had already drifted into a deep slumber, exhausted from a day spent preparing food and mending clothes for the family. She often reflected on their journey and how far they had come, but the physical toll of their labor was evident on her face, even in sleep. Tommy, the youngest boy, snuggled close to his sister, Sarah, finding warmth in the shared heat of their bodies as the air grew colder with the approach of night. These early settlements, sleep was often a luxury that was hard to come by. The communal nature of their beds also meant that one person's restlessness could easily disrupt another's sleep. Settlers had to adapt their habits to accommodate this shared space. Whispers at night were common, as they tried to keep noise to a minimum while still engaging in family discussions. It was a delicate balance between the need for rest and the need for connection among the family members. As the days passed, it became clear that inadequate bedding was contributing to health issues within the family. John noticed that Sarah was more susceptible to colds and coughs, symptoms of the dampness that often permeated their sleeping area. The straw beds, while a necessary comfort, harbored pests and allergens that made the family vulnerable to illness. Mary, although determined to create a healthy environment for her children, found it challenging to maintain cleanliness in their crude home. The dirt floors made it difficult to keep out the elements, and their bedding needed constant attention to prevent the accumulation of mildew and insects. To combat these issues, John and Mary decided to gather resources from their surroundings. They began to research what could be done to improve their sleeping conditions. They explored the nearby woods, collecting fir boughs and dried leaves to create a more elevated sleeping surface. The fir boughs provided a natural insulation against the cold ground, while the leaves offered additional cushioning. This new arrangement allowed the family to sleep a little better, and John had noticed a slight improvement in Sarah's health as well. However, they still faced the challenge of finding a space large enough for the entire family to sleep comfortably, particularly as the children grew. As the population of settlers increased, so too did the need for more structured sleeping arrangements. New families arriving at the settlement brought different customs and practices from their homelands, influencing the way they approached sleep. Some settlers introduced the idea of partitions within communal spaces, creating designated sleeping areas that provided a modicum of privacy. Others brought with them the knowledge of crafting simple beds from local timbers, which allowed families to elevate their sleeping surfaces off the ground entirely. While these innovations were slow to spread, they offered a glimpse of the future of sleeping arrangements in America. The winter, the family faced additional obstacles. The fleeting warmth from the day dissipated quickly as the sun set, and the chill seeped into their cabin. To combat the cold, they learned to sleep in layers, utilizing every piece of clothing and wool blanket they could muster. Tommy and Sarah often found themselves wrapped in their mother's homemade quilts, a patchwork of colors that told stories of the materials collected from their homestead. It became a tradition to add new patches to these quilts, each representing a memory or a resourceful moment in their lives. Mary had become quite adept at quilting, and her creations soon became a source of pride for the family. Other settlers admired her work, and she began to barter her quilts for food and other essential goods. This newfound skill not only provided warmth, but also strengthened her sense of community among the settlers, as they gathered to share stories while sewing together. As they settled into their new sleeping arrangements, the family found a rhythm to their daily lives. The children learned to help with chores, and even little Tommy took on small tasks like fetching water or gathering firewood. Each morning, the family would rise before dawn, often greeted by the golden rays of the sun peeking through the cracks of their cabin. Breakfast was a hurried affair, consisting of porridge made from cornmeal or whatever grains they could find, before setting out to tend to their daily needs. Sundays became a special day for the family, a time for rest and reflection. They would gather for prayers and share stories of their ancestors, connecting their past to their present. It was during these gatherings that John spoke of the importance of sleep, emphasizing that it was not just a time for rest, but also a time for dreams and aspirations. The family would often discuss their hopes for the future, envisioning a time when they would have a proper house with solid walls and comfortable beds. However, the reality of their situation was still ever present. The health issues that plagued their family could not be ignored. John had begun to notice a trend of fatigue among the settlers, attributing it to their poor sleeping conditions. He took it upon himself to gather the men of the settlement to discuss improvements to their living arrangements. It was a daunting task, as each family had their own set of challenges and traditions, yet he felt it was necessary for the community's well-being. At the next meeting, John stood before the group, the flickering light from the fire illuminating his determined face. He spoke passionately about the importance of rest and health, urging the men to consider investing time into building raised beds. As he laid out his vision, he emphasized that it would not only improve their physical health, but also their productivity during the day. The group listened intently, and some even nodded in agreement. It was a step towards a collective solution to their shared struggle. As John concluded his speech, a few men volunteered to help gather materials for the beds. The excitement in the air was palpable. The prospect of better sleep was a beacon of hope for the settlers. The need for improved sleeping arrangements was becoming a shared priority, one that would pave the way for healthier and happier lives in their growing community. The plan laid out by John would take time, effort, and cooperation, but the settlers were eager to forge ahead toward a brighter future. The early American settlers were beginning to understand that sleep was an integral part of their survival and well-being, shaping not just their health, but their daily routines and their very lives. As they embarked on this journey to improve their sleeping conditions, they could only wonder how their customs and practices would continue to evolve with the nation around them. With each new development, they were not just building beds, but laying the foundations for a new way of life. And so, as the settlers worked together to create a better sleeping environment, they prepared for the changes that would come with the passage of time. It was a journey of adaptation and growth, one that would carry them into the next chapter of their lives, where sleep would become a fundamental cornerstone of their expanding communities. Next, we will delve deeper into how these evolving sleeping arrangements influenced the overall health of early settlers and shaped their sense of community. As winter approached in the small settlement nestled between the towering pines, John and Mary gathered their children, Sarah and Tommy, around the flickering fire. The chilly air seeped through the cracks of their one-room home, making the warmth of the fire all the more inviting. The family had recently taken steps to improve their sleeping conditions, realizing that the cold, damp ground was not only uncomfortable, but detrimental to their health. John stood, adjusting the pile of straw in the corner that served as their makeshift bed. It had been a long, exhausting day, spent collecting food and firewood, and the promise of a better night's sleep was a hopeful thought. As he fluffed the straw, he reflected on the stories he had heard from the elders about the bedding practices of their ancestors. In those tales, he learned that early settlers often slept in communal spaces, sharing warmth and resources. Mary, watching her husband, chimed in, "Do you remember when we first moved here? Our bedding was nothing more than a few leaves under our bodies. We hardly slept at all." She smiled, recalling the laughter that had accompanied their struggles, reinforcing their bond as a family. "You're right. I hardly remember a night without shivering," John replied, a hint of nostalgia in his voice. He turned to their children, who were now snuggled closer to the warmth. "But we're learning, aren't we? Each season we adapt, and we find better ways to take care of ourselves." Sarah, curious as ever, piped up, "What if we added more leaves and some of that wool from the sheep? It could make it even cozier." Tommy, always eager to contribute, nodded vigorously. "And we could build a wall of logs around the bedding to keep the draft out." John chuckled, appreciating their ingenuity. "Those are great ideas, but we need to focus on what we can manage right now. Let's start with your wool idea, Sarah. We'll gather some tomorrow." That night, as they settled into sleep, huddled together to share warmth against the night's chill, John couldn't help but think about the health issues that had plagued their community in previous winters. He remembered the stories of the sickness that spread like wildfire when families were unable to achieve warmth and rest. The blankets of wool and straw created a barrier against the cold, but it was their collective effort to improve their environment that truly fostered a sense of communal unity. The coming weeks, as they made adjustments to their sleeping arrangements, something subtle yet profound happened. Neighbors began to gather more frequently to share stories, tools, and even resources for their bedding. The act of improving their individual sleeping spaces transformed into a communal project where every household contributed what they could. Mary took it upon herself to organize a day for women in the settlement to come together. They gathered at her home, each bringing wool, spare fabric, or even herbs for teas. As they crafted new bedding, conversations flowed freely. They shared remedies for ailments, discussed the difficulties of raising children in the wilderness, and laughed about the peculiarities of their new life. John observed the growing camaraderie among the women while tending to the fire outside. He understood that these gatherings were not merely about bedding, they were about fortifying their community. As families supported each other, they were forming connections that would be essential for survival and comfort in the harsh environment. As the days turned to weeks, John's family noticed a marked improvement in their health. The children were less prone to colds, and even Mary, who had struggled with aches from long hours of labor, found more rest at night. The efforts made to enhance their sleeping arrangements extended beyond their home. It rippled through their community. The settlers began to see the correlation between their health and the care they put into their living conditions. With winter in full swing, the settlers gathered around the fire on a particularly cold evening. The warmth of companionship filled the air as they recounted stories of their past. John listened intently as one of the elders spoke of how their sleeping arrangements had evolved over generations. "In the beginning, we made do with what we could find, but as we learned from each other, we found better ways to stay warm and healthy," the elder explained, his voice steady and full of wisdom. The settlers knew they had come a long way from sleeping on bare ground or thin leaves. They were now crafting sturdy beds from logs and stuffing them with abundant straw, hay, and animal furs. The comforts they were creating were not just for themselves, they were a commitment to their future as a community. As their laughter mingled with the crackling of the fire, John realized that the act of improving their sleeping conditions had become a cornerstone of their community identity. They were no longer just a series of isolated families. They were interdependent, each relying on one another for support. This realization brought John a sense of peace amidst the chaos of their rugged existence. The children played nearby, their laughter filling the night air, symbolizing the innocence and joy that had emerged from the settlers' hard work. Tommy and Sarah had taken to gathering extra wool from the sheep, which they would twine into blankets for their beds. They found joy in their contributions, not realizing the deeper impact they were having on their family and community. As the evening wore on, John and Mary exchanged glances filled with unspoken understanding. They knew that their life was a series of adaptations, each more profound than the last. The simple act of sleeping was no longer trivial. It was an act of hope and resilience that tied them to each other and to the land they inhabited. Finally, as the fire began to die down and fatigue settled in, John gathered his family close. "Tomorrow, invite the neighbors over again. It's time we share not just our bedding improvements, but also our gratitude for each other's support." With that, they snuggled together in their newly fleece-stuffed bedding, feeling the comfort of warmth and community wrap around them like a protective blanket. They drifted into a restful sleep, a stark contrast to the restless nights of their first winter. And so it was that sleeping arrangements not only influenced their health, but also forged an unbreakable bond among the early settlers, shaping their very community into something more resilient and united than they could have ever imagined. As the fire's embers glowed softly, casting flickering shadows against the walls of their home, John's thoughts turned to the future. What would the next season hold for them? How would they continue to evolve as both individuals and as a community? He closed his eyes, feeling a deep sense of contentment, yet a drive for further improvement simmered within him. Thus, with the warmth of unity and hope enveloping them, they rested, ready to embrace the challenges and triumphs of the days to come. As winter descended upon the settlement, the need for better sleeping arrangements became critical. John, who had spent much of his time working in the fields, found himself increasingly worried about the well-being of his family. The chill in the air seeped through the wooden walls, and the makeshift beds of straw and leaves did little to keep the cold at bay. Each night, as they huddled together, he could see the weariness etched on Mary's face, a reflection of their shared struggles. To address their plight, John convened a gathering of nearby families, hoping to find a solution. He proposed a community project to create more substantial bedding that could withstand the harsh winters. The idea was met with enthusiasm, as everyone was aware that improved sleeping arrangements would enhance their health and, in turn, strengthen the community. The settlers began to share materials and skills, pooling their resources to craft better beds. They harvested soft moss and gathered fir boughs to act as insulation, while others offered animal skins that they had tanned themselves. Mary took charge of organizing the sewing of the skins into makeshift covers, while John led the younger men in collecting materials. As the days grew shorter, the sense of camaraderie blossomed among the settlers. They worked together, not just as neighbors, but as a collective, sharing laughter and stories around the fire at night after long hours of labor. Sarah and Tommy, inspired by their parents' dedication, eagerly helped by collecting scraps and assisting in the crafting process. Sarah would often suggest improvements, her creativity sparking new ideas that made the beds not only functional but more comfortable. Their efforts culminated in a community celebration. Once the beds were completed, the settlers gathered in the largest cabin, where the new bedding lay proudly arranged. Candles flickered as families marveled at their work, a tangible product of their unity. "This is more than just bedding," John declared, his voice resonating with pride. "It's a symbol of our strength, our ability to face the hardships together." The others nodded, appreciating the deeper meaning behind their labor. The beds were indeed a testament to their resilience, forging stronger bonds as they laid down to rest each night. However, not everything was perfect. With the enhanced sleeping conditions came an influx of visitors, as neighboring families, drawn by word of mouth, sought warmth and comfort. This created a new challenge: how to accommodate everyone while maintaining a sense of privacy and individual space. The settlers had to navigate the delicate balance between communal living and personal comfort, an ongoing negotiation of boundaries. Mary, always intuitive to the needs of her family, recognized the strain that this influx put on their daily routines. She suggested that they create a rotation system. Each family would take turns hosting the others, ensuring that no single household bore the burden of guests for too long. This way, they could maintain their sense of home while fostering the community spirit that had become so vital. As they settled into this new arrangement, the children formed deeper friendships, learning from one another's experiences and stories. Sarah and Tommy would often share tales of their own adventures and dreams, envisioning a time when their efforts might lead to an even bigger community, one that could thrive against all odds. Through the winter months, the settlers learned to adapt, their lives intertwined like the threads in the blankets they had crafted. With each passing day, they became more adept at navigating the complexities of their shared existence, discovering that their health improved alongside the quality of their sleep. The children grew more energetic, and the adults found solace in the warmth of their communal spirit. By spring, the bonds forged during the winter had transformed the community into a tightly knit family. They began to plan for the future, contemplating how they could build their homes to be more accommodating and sustainable. With the arrival of warmer weather, ideas flourished, and discussions about creating designated sleeping quarters started to take shape. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, casting long shadows over the settlement, John gathered the families to discuss their next steps. "We have proven that we can rely on one another," he began, his voice steady. "Now it's time to think about how we can improve our homes for the years to come." With heads nodding in agreement, the settlers brainstormed. They envisioned shared community spaces where families could gather while still having private sleeping areas. The idea of building a larger communal cabin emerged, one that could accommodate everyone while also allowing for smaller sleeping quarters. This would provide a sanctuary during harsh winters and a hub for togetherness in the warmer months. As plans were laid out, excitement buzzed through the air. Mary envisioned decorative elements that could personalize each sleeping space, making them feel unique yet part of a whole. Sarah suggested planting flowers around the new cabin, imagining how they would bloom in the spring, a symbol of their hard work and cooperation. Tommy, ever the dreamer, looked beyond just better beds. "What if we also make it a place for storytelling?" he asked, his eyes wide with possibility. "A place where we can gather and share our tales?" The idea resonated with everyone, and soon they were discussing how nightly gatherings could become a cherished tradition. As they wrapped up the meeting, the settlers felt invigorated. They had transformed their struggles into a vision for the future. Each family felt a sense of ownership over the plans, knowing that their contributions would shape the very fabric of their community. The dreams of warm beds and shared stories beckoned on the horizon, and with renewed purpose they set to work, ready to build not just a place to sleep, but a home that thrived on connection and friendship. The challenges of survival had forged their bonds, but it was their aspirations for a better life that would propel them forward. With the sun dipping below the treetops, John gathered his family close, his heart swelling with hope. Tomorrow we start building not just beds, but a future. As the night settled in around them, the settlers drifted off to sleep, dreams of their plans filling their minds. Little did they know, the journey ahead would test their resolve yet again, leading them to discover the true meaning of home and community. And as the dawn of a new day approached, the settlers would soon learn that the challenges they faced were merely stepping stones towards a deeper understanding of their intertwined lives, leading them into the next chapter of their adventure. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the modest homesteads, John gathered with his neighbors around a crackling fire. The warmth offered a stark contrast to the chill of the approaching night, and the flickering flames illuminated the weary faces of the settlers. Each looked more tired than the last, but also more determined. The talk of better beds and improved health had sparked a fire of its own, igniting a spirit of cooperation among them. Mary had spent the day collecting leaves and straw from the nearby fields, and now she stood at the entrance of their humble cabin, idly brushing the dirt from her hands. The children, Sarah and Tommy, were sprawled on the floor, surrounded by piles of straw and dried leaves, giggling as they competed to see who could build the most inviting bed. "Look, Mama, mine's the softest," Tommy shouted, fluffing the straw with a sense of pride. Mary smiled, her heart swelling at the sight. "It looks wonderful, love. But remember, we'll be sharing these when the time comes." She glanced at John, who was deep in conversation with Peter Baker about the best materials to use for their new bedding. The burden of poor sleep had weighed heavily on them all, but tonight it felt as though hope was finally within reach. "John, I was thinking," Peter said, nudging the fire with a stick. "What if we all pooled our resources? We could gather more straw, and I know where to find some old animal skins. They could make our beds warmer and last longer." John nodded thoughtfully. "That's a good idea, but we'll need to find a way to come together as a community more regularly. It's not just about the bedding, it's about how we support each other through these hardships." The group murmured in agreement. The idea of working together held promise, not just for their immediate need for better sleep, but for a stronger sense of community in the long term. As the night went on, they discussed various strategies. They shared stories of their own struggles with sleepless nights and the toll it took on their families. Mary chimed in, recalling how Sarah had fallen ill after a particularly cold night on their hard-packed earth floor. The conversation shifted to ideas for creating communal sleeping arrangements, with parents taking turns watching over the children. By the end of the night, they had forged a plan. Each family would gather materials from their own land and set a date for a community workday to build better beds together. They would share their knowledge, labor, and resources, fostering bonds that would make them stronger against the challenges of the harsh wilderness. As the fire began to die down, John looked around at the faces of his neighbors, illuminated in the glow of the embers. The sense of unity he felt was palpable, and for the first time in months he dared to dream of peaceful nights ahead. With renewed purpose, he turned to Mary as they walked back to their cabin. "We've got work to do, love. Tomorrow, I'll head to the river and see if I can find some willow branches for support." "What about you?" Mary smiled, the warmth of his optimism wrapping around her like a blanket. "I'll gather more straw and check with Mrs. Hall about any skins they might have." The following days buzzed with activity. They worked tirelessly in the fields, collecting the necessary materials. The children often played nearby, transforming the gathering into a new kind of adventure, running through the tall grass and laughing amidst the chaos of adult labor. The local creek became their meeting point, a place to cool off and share their findings. Each family contributed what they could, the communal effort transforming into a weekly tradition. As they toiled, they began to notice subtle changes in their community. They shared meals more often, their laughter mingling with the clinking of wooden spoons and the aroma of stews simmering on makeshift fires. As they worked side by side, they became more than just neighbors. They became friends, a tight-knit community bound together by their shared struggles and aspirations. On a sunny afternoon, the day arrived for the construction of their new beds. The mood was electric with anticipation as everyone gathered in the clearing behind the baker's home. They laid out the materials: soft straw, sturdy willow branches, and animal skins. John took charge, leading the assembly with a confidence born from the knowledge that they were all in this together. "Let's work together to create something that we can all be proud of," he encouraged, his voice strong and steady. With teamwork, laughter, and a little trial and error, the settlers crafted beds that were far superior to their previous arrangements. The straw was piled high, and the skins were expertly stretched over the frames, providing warmth and comfort that they had only dreamt of before. As evening fell, they stood back to admire their handiwork. Beds lined the clearing, each one reflecting the effort and dedication of the families that had come together to create them. Mary beamed at the sight, her heart full. "This is just the beginning," she whispered to John, who nodded in agreement. With the new beds, they could finally hope for better nights filled with rest, strength, and the ability to face the challenges that lay ahead. But as they settled down for their first night on their new beds, a sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, rustling the leaves and sending a chill through their bones. The whispers of the woods surrounded them, a reminder that nature's challenges were ever present and the future was still uncertain. As they lay on the soft straw for the first time, peace washed over them, but a sense of unease lingered. They had overcome so much, but what lay beyond their newfound comfort? As the stars twinkled above, John turned to Mary, determination etched on his face. "Tomorrow, we'll begin thinking of how we can protect our community from the next storm that comes our way." And so, as the settlers drifted into a deep sleep, the fire of their ambitions burned brightly in their hearts, leading them toward the next chapter of their journey, a journey where they would not only face nature's unpredictability, but also redefine what it meant to be a community bound by resilience and hope. With the glow of morning light spilling into their small home, John sat up and stretched, the rough straw beneath him still warm from the night's embrace. He glanced over at Mary, who was already tending to the remnants of their humble meal. The sweet smell of corn porridge filled the air, mingling with the earthy scent of the straw bedding. The children, Sarah and Tommy, remained snugly wrapped in their layers of animal skins, blissfully unaware of the responsibilities that awaited them. Today was not just another day. It marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. The family had heard whispers from neighboring settlers about the importance of a community gathering to improve their living conditions and discuss plans for the future. John had always believed that the strength of the family lay in the bonds of the community, and now, more than ever, they needed those ties. As Mary placed bowls of porridge in front of each family member, John's mind raced with the possibilities that lay ahead. "We should join the meeting at the town square today, Mary," he said, breaking the morning silence. "The neighbors have been talking about better ways to sleep and how we might share resources." Mary nodded, her brow furrowed with concern. "Do you think they'll truly want to work together? After all, everyone is struggling." "Perhaps," John replied, his voice steady. "But if we don't reach out, we'll never know. If we collaborate, we might discover new materials for bedding or find ways to improve our homes. That will bring us closer." With a sigh, Mary agreed, and soon the family finished their meal and dressed in the day's simple attire. Sarah, the eldest child, excitedly clapped her hands, eager to participate in the gathering. "Will there be stories, Papa? I want to hear tales of how others have made their beds more comfortable." John smiled at her enthusiasm. "Yes, my dear. There will be stories, and perhaps we can even learn how to make our own beds better." Tommy, still yawning and rubbing sleep from his eyes, added, "Can we have real beds like the ones I saw in the fancy places?" John chuckled softly. "Well, start small, Tommy. One step at a time." The family bundled up for the chilly morning air and made their way to the town square, where they found other settlers gathering, some familiar faces and many they had yet to meet. The square buzzed with hopeful chatter as families exchanged ideas and shared tales of their recent efforts to improve their living conditions. The spirit of collaboration hung thick in the air, and John felt his heart swell with a sense of belonging. As the meeting commenced, a wise elder named Mr. Thompson stood before the crowd, a rugged man with a long beard and a voice that carried authority. He spoke of the struggles of sleeping on makeshift beds and how they had affected the health of many families. "Our backs ache, our nights are restless, and our dreams are often dampened by the cold floors we sleep upon." He raised a hand, gesturing to the surrounding families. "Together, we can find better solutions." Spirations flowed like the gentle breeze, stories filled the air, and as the sunlight rose higher, illuminating the square, ideas began to take shape. They discussed using dried leaves and animal furs for softer bedding, sharing techniques for weaving straw into thicker mattresses, and trading materials like wool for those who had excess. John listened intently, drawn into the collective vision of improvement. Minutes turned into hours as families contributed their knowledge, and John felt a strong sense of purpose. He glanced at Mary, who was engaged in conversation with other women, exchanging ideas about washing furs and maintaining hygiene. He realized how each contribution, no matter how small, could foster community interdependence, a bond that could endure hardship. As the meeting concluded, Mr. Thompson announced that they would organize a collective effort to gather materials and share knowledge. The crowd erupted in murmurs of agreement, and John turned to Mary, smiling. "This is what we needed, a united front." Mary looked back at him with newfound determination. "Yes, together we can create a better future." As they walked home, the family felt a sense of hope. They were not just surviving, they were building a community willing to support one another through hardships. That night, they settled back into their straw beds, but this time their dreams were filled with visions of brighter tomorrows. They envisioned their home filled with improved sleeping arrangements, where each family member could rest soundly, free from the discomforts of their past. As the moon cast a soft glow through their small windows, John whispered to Mary, "Imagine if we could gather enough materials to create a real bed for each of us. We would finally have a place to rest our weary bodies." Mary smiled softly, her heart swelling with pride for their family and community. "We will, John. Together, we will make it happen." That night, as they drifted off to sleep, the family felt the warmth of hope enveloping them, propelling them toward the challenges of tomorrow. They understood that the journey ahead would be filled with hard work, but the bonds they were forming would make every effort worth it. With the promise of a better future resting just beyond the horizon, John knew that their dedication to improving their sleeping arrangements would lead to a stronger, healthier community. and he felt prepared to face whatever awaited them next. As they prepared for another day of labor and collaboration, John gathered his family around him and said, "Tomorrow we will visit the barn to gather the materials we've discussed. It's time we start building our new beds." As dawn broke over the small settlement, John stood at the door of their humble abode, watching the sun climb sluggishly into the sky. The morning light illuminated the dilapidated structure, casting shadows that danced across the dirt floor. Today marked the beginning of a new chapter for his family. They were no longer going to sleep on piles of straw and leaves. Instead, they would work together to gather the materials necessary for a more substantial sleeping arrangement. Mary emerged from the cabin, brushing her hair back from her face as she joined John at the threshold. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty that lingered in the air. "As ready as he'll ever be," John replied, a determined glint in his eye. Their children, Sarah and Tommy, bounded out of the cabin, excitement bubbling over as they envisioned the prospect of a real bed. "Can we help?" Tommy asked, his small hands already clutching a makeshift satchel, eager to collect anything they might need. "Of course. We'll need all hands on deck for this one," Mary smiled, her motherly instincts guiding the children toward productivity. After a quick breakfast of cornbread and water, the family set out toward the nearby woods where they had heard stories of sturdy trees and soft moss. As they walked, John pointed out various plants that could be used, linking each to their potential uses in construction. "Look over there, kids. That's some good oak, strong enough to hold a frame. And if we can find some pine, we can use the needles for stuffing," he explained, his voice bubbling with enthusiasm. Sarah trotted beside him, her eyes wide with wonder. "What about the leaves? Can we use those too?" she chimed in, already imagining the earthy scent of bedding made from nature's bounty. "Exactly, Sarah. The leaves will help give us some insulation and we can make sure it's nice and cozy." "We'll be far better off than we are now, that's for sure," John encouraged. As they ventured deeper into the woods, each family member took on a role. John demonstrated how to carefully measure lengths of wood, teaching Tommy the importance of precision. Meanwhile, Mary guided Sarah in gathering leaves and moss, emphasizing the need for a soft and welcoming surface. They worked swiftly, laughing and joking, their spirits high as they envisioned their future, a shared space that promised warmth and comfort. The sun climbed higher, and soon the heat of the day pressed down upon them. After what felt like hours, they had accumulated an impressive pile of supplies, sturdy branches, soft moss, and an array of leaves. With their bounty secured, they began the trek back to their cabin, the excitement palpable. "Do you think our bed will be bigger than the one we have now?" Tommy asked, shuffling along with his arms laden with materials. Mary chuckled softly, her heart swelling with love for her children. "Oh, it will be much bigger. We'll even have room to stretch out." As they arrived back at their home, a sense of accomplishment washed over them. They unloaded the materials, and John wasted no time in laying out the plan for their new sleeping space. With the sun beginning to set, they gathered around a small clearing outside their cabin to create a workspace. First, we need to create the frame. Then we'll fill it with the soft materials we gathered. "I'll need your help with this part, Tommy," John instructed, kneeling down to sketch the dimensions in the dirt. Mary and Sarah began to sift through the gathered leaves and moss, placing them in neat piles, ready for the final touches. The air was filled with laughter and a sense of camaraderie as they worked together, the family bonding over this shared endeavor. As they constructed the frame, John recalled tales he had heard from fellow settlers about the importance of sleep and its impact on health. Did you know that before beds were common, many people slept poorly? It was often a communal affair, and while it kept families close, it also led to health issues, he shared, turning to face his children. What kind of health issues? Sarah asked, her brow furrowed in curiosity. John thought for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Well, when people didn't have proper beds, they often suffered from aches and pains, and some even got sick more often. But our new bed will help keep us healthy and strong. The children nodded in understanding, their eyes bright with the vision of their new sleeping arrangements. After hours of labor under the fading light, the frame was finally complete. "Now for the fun part," John exclaimed, motioning for everyone to gather around. They began to layer the leaves and moss inside the frame, creating a soft, cushioned surface. As they worked, the evening air filled with the earthy scent of nature, invigorating their spirits. Finally, once the last leaf was tucked into place, John stepped back to admire their handiwork. The bed stood proud in the center of their small home, a symbol of their hard work and commitment to each other. "What do you think?" he asked, watching as the children climbed atop their creation with glee. Sarah settled down first, stretching her arms wide, her laughter ringing through the air. "It's perfect," she declared, while Tommy hopped on next, bouncing excitedly. Mary joined them, lying down and reveling in the comfort they had created together. John watched, contentment blossoming in his chest. They had not only fashioned a bed, they had also woven the threads of family and community tighter through their collective effort. As night fell, they lit a small fire outside, gathering around it to celebrate their achievement. The flames crackled, casting a warm glow over their faces as they shared stories, their hearts filled with gratitude for what they had accomplished. "You know, this bed will not just keep us warm," John mused, gazing into the flames. "It will also bring us together. We'll all sleep better, knowing we've worked as a family to create something special. And maybe tomorrow we can invite the Wilsons over to show them what we've done. They might want to join in and create their own beds, too." The children's eyes sparkled at the thought of a gathering, and Mary nodded in agreement, her heart swelling with pride. "That sounds like a wonderful idea, John. We can share what we've learned and help them gather materials." With plans for the following day already forming, they settled down beside the fire, their hearts full of hope and unity. As they listened to the sounds of the night, it became clear that their journey was just beginning. Tomorrow would hold new opportunities and the promise of shared experiences, and with that realization, John felt a renewed sense of purpose. The world outside their home was vast and filled with possibilities, and this night marked only the first step toward a brighter future. As their eyes grew heavy with sleep, John whispered, "I can't wait to see what tomorrow brings. Our story is just getting started." And with that, the family drifted into slumber, dreaming of the adventures that awaited them in the days to come. The days that followed, the rhythmic sounds of nature outside their small home began to blend seamlessly with the laughter and chatter of the family within. John woke each morning to the gentle rustling of leaves, a soothing reminder of the life they were building together. Each day brought new tasks and new opportunities for collaboration, and with each task, the bonds between them grew stronger. Mary took to organizing their space with great care. The newly built bed was not merely a structure, it was a centerpiece of their new life, a testament to their resourcefulness and determination. She adorned the bed with straw and leaves, making it as comfortable as possible given their limited resources. It became a shared haven, a place where they could gather at the end of the day to share stories, reflect, and dream. Meanwhile, Sarah and Tommy busied themselves outside, exploring the woods that surrounded their home. They often returned with wildflowers and twigs, which Mary used to create small decorations for their living space. These simple gestures turned their home into a warm and inviting environment, reflecting the love and creativity of its inhabitants. As their days passed, it became evident that the family's success was not solely due to their efforts, but also the connections they were forming with neighboring settlers. Recognizing the importance of community, John suggested that they host a gathering, inviting nearby families to their homestead. The idea ignited a spark of excitement within each member of the family, and soon they were all involved in preparations. The day of the gathering arrived, marked by the aroma of freshly baked bread, a skill Mary had recently honed. The family worked together, gathering wild fruits and vegetables to share with their guests. As the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the land, the first arrivals appeared, bringing with them dishes of their own. Families from the neighboring homesteads included the Johnsons and the Millers, each with their unique stories and experiences etched on their faces. The children quickly set off to play, creating a joyful cacophony of laughter and shouts that echoed among the trees. The adults gathered around a large wooden table, sharing stories of hardships and triumphs, their voices mingling in a symphony of camaraderie. Throughout the evening, conversations flowed as freely as the sweet cider they shared. John and Mary learned about the struggles the Johnsons faced while building their own home, and the Millers' recent success in making a new type of bedding using cotton they had traded for. The discussions led to exchanges of ideas, tips, and even promises of collaboration in future harvesting seasons. As darkness fell, the families gathered around a crackling fire, a warm beacon against the chill of the night air. The flickering flames danced in the eyes of the children, who sat entranced by the storytelling of the adults. John took the opportunity to share the story of their own journey, from their departure to this new land, to the challenges they faced in creating a home. The firelight illuminated the faces of those gathered, revealing smiles of understanding and empathy. It became clear that their struggles were not solitary. They were part of a larger tapestry of resilience and hope that wove through the community. The sense of belonging was palpable, and the settlers began to understand that their new life was not just about survival, but about thriving together. As the meeting wound down, families began to bid each other farewell, but not before planning their next gathering, solidifying the bonds they had begun to forge. Sarah and Tommy were reluctant to leave their new friends, but were comforted by the promise of more adventures to come. The days that followed, the family found themselves inspired by the spirit of collaboration they had witnessed at the gathering. John and Mary began discussing further improvements they could make to their home. They realized that their bed, while a great achievement, was just the beginning. They envisioned a space that would allow them to shelter not just themselves, but also their neighbors in times of need. With the knowledge gained from their friends, John decided to embark on constructing additional sleeping areas for visitors. He envisioned a series of lofted sleeping platforms that could accommodate more people without taking up too much space on the ground. Mary suggested using woven mats to make it comfortable, drawing from the ideas shared by the Millers about their cotton experiences. Days turned into weeks, and the family worked tirelessly on their new project. They gathered more materials, cutting down branches and weaving grasses together to create the lofts. Sarah and Tommy helped with enthusiasm, learning the value of hard work and the satisfaction of contributing to a communal space. As they toiled, they sometimes encountered setbacks, a branch that wouldn't fit, or a mat that unraveled. However, each challenge was met with resilience, laughter, and a shared determination to succeed. It was during these moments that their family bond strengthened the most. They learned to rely on each other's strengths, be it Mary's creativity or John's problem-solving skills. Finally, the lofts were completed, and the family stood back to admire their handiwork. They had created a welcoming space that extended beyond their immediate needs, a symbol of their commitment to the community. They invited their neighbors over to see the new additions, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. With this new space readily available, John and Mary felt a renewed sense of purpose. They understood that while they had improved their living conditions, they had also taken a significant step towards building a thriving community. The act of creating these lofts was not just about adding physical space. It was about enhancing relationships and establishing a support network that could withstand the trials of frontier life. As the sun set over the horizon, casting a warm glow over their home, John and Mary shared a quiet moment, reflecting on how far they had come and how much they had achieved together. They knew the road ahead would still be fraught with challenges, but with each small victory, they felt more prepared to face whatever lay ahead. With the promise of a bright future and a community that stood ready to support them, John turned to Mary and said, "Let's prepare for the winter. We have many more hands to feed now, and we need to be ready." His determination was met with Mary's nod of agreement, and they began to plan for the season ahead, their hearts filled with hope and unity. And so, as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, the family settled into their newly expanded home, their hearts entwined with the spirit of collaboration that had begun to define their lives. The journey of building not just a home, but a community was only just beginning, and they were eager to see where it would lead them next. The warmth of their gathering echoed in the air, and as they prepared for the upcoming challenges, the family could not help but feel a sense of excitement. They knew that together they would not only survive, but thrive, ready to turn their collective dreams into reality. What awaited them in the coming days was a test of their resolve and a chance to further strengthen their bonds with each other and their newfound friends. Thus, the stage was set for the next chapter of their lives, filled with promise and the potential for growth, as they prepared to navigate the unpredictable seasons of both nature and community. As the biting cold of winter crept closer, John gathered the family around the flickering glow of their modest fire. "We must go beyond just building beds, my dear family," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "This winter will be harsh, and we need to ensure not just our comfort, but our survival as a community." Mary nodded, her brow creased with worry but also determination. The children, Sarah and Tommy, sensed the gravity of the moment and huddled closer, listening intently. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, John and Mary discussed their plans further. They envisioned a community that was not only surviving, but thriving, even as the snow began to blanket the landscape outside. They organized a gathering the following day, inviting their neighbors to discuss how they could all support one another through the winter months. The next morning brought a crisp, clear day. The community gathered in the large, central space that had become their meeting ground. As John addressed the group, he noticed the mix of apprehension and hope on their faces. They all understood the weight of the season ahead. "We have built our beds, but now we must ensure that we have enough food and warmth to last through the winter," John said. He proposed a community plan where each family would contribute what they could, whether it was food preservation, firewood collection, or sharing their knowledge of the land. Mary shared her idea about setting up a communal pantry where families could store extra food and supplies, creating a safety net for those who might struggle as the cold days stretched on. As they brainstormed, Sarah and Tommy took it upon themselves to gather the younger children and get them involved. They suggested a vegetable garden that could be tended even in the fall, and with the help of the adults, they began to sketch out plans for raised beds. Each suggestion brought a spark of excitement and camaraderie among the adults, who began to see the possibilities of working together. By the end of the day, the families had not only agreed on their roles, but also forged deeper ties. Each person felt invested in the community's fate, knowing their survival depended on the strength of their collaboration. They promised to check on one another regularly, sharing news and resources. As the sun dipped below the horizon, a sense of hopeful determination filled the air, a stark contrast to the creeping chill of winter. The following weeks, the community came together to collect firewood. John led the men into the nearby woods, instructing them on safe tree felling and transportation methods. Meanwhile, Mary organized the women and older children to gather and prepare food stores. They preserved meats through salting and smoking, while others dried fruits and vegetables, creating colorful arrays of goods to sustain them through the lean months. As the frost began to coat the ground, they found joy in their collective achievements. The children laughed and played in the falling leaves, blissfully unaware of the challenges their parents faced. Sarah and Tommy took pride in leading their young friends in gathering acorns and nuts, which they learned could be stored for the winter. The children's laughter echoed through the trees, a sweet sound that lifted the spirits of the weary adults. As winter set in, the community transformed into a tight-knit unit. Gathering around the evening fire became a ritual where stories were shared and laughter was abundant. Mary often recounted tales of their ancestors and how they survived similar hardships. These stories not only entertained, but also educated the children about resilience and unity. Health, however, began to wane as the cold and darkness stretched on. The cramped quarters, while filled with laughter, also harbored the spread of colds and the flu. John took note of this and implemented a schedule for regular check-ins on each family. Mary began teaching the others about herbal remedies that could help alleviate the symptoms of illness. They cultivated a small herb garden in a sheltered area, promoting health through natural means. As they navigated the challenges of winter, the settlers learned more about the importance of rest and the role of proper bedding in supporting health. They noticed that those with good sleeping arrangements fared better, able to fight off illnesses that plagued their neighbors. The act of working together to improve their beds had laid the foundation for a community that could endure and adapt. Through these hardships, a new tradition emerged. Each family would take turns sharing their meals and stories, fostering an atmosphere of gratitude and connection. As the snow piled high, the laughter and warmth in their homes grew thicker. They found joy in the little things, a shared meal, a warm blanket, or a story told by firelight. As spring began to tease the horizon, with crocuses and snowdrops peeking through the remnants of winter's hold, the settlers turned their attention to what lay ahead. They knew the coming months would bring opportunities for growth, both in their gardens and as a community. They began to map out plans for planting crops and expanding their living arrangements to accommodate the growth of their families and the community. They spoke of building a larger communal space, one that could host gatherings and celebrations, turning their modest settlement into a vibrant hub for connection and commerce. Everyone was excited about the future, and the children began to dream of the flowers, fruits, and the bounty that spring would bring. As the last of the winter ice melted away, John gathered the families once more. "We have weathered the storm together, and now we must plant seeds both in our gardens and our hearts. Together, we can build a future that honors our past and nurtures the bonds we've forged." With hope glowing like the first rays of spring sun, they prepared to enter a new season filled with potential and promise. The stranger, a tall figure cloaked in a tattered brown coat, drew near the settlement with deliberate steps. John, the father of the settler family, stood at the edge of their clearing, watching with an air of cautious optimism. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the ground, and a chill breeze whispered through the trees, hinting at the approaching winter. Mary, his wife, tied her apron as she moved to join him. "What do you think he wants, John?" she whispered, her voice barely above the leaves rustling in the wind. John furrowed his brow, his eyes narrowing as he took in the stranger. "I can't be sure, but he looks weary and hungry, like he's traveled far. Perhaps he seeks refuge, or maybe he brings news from the outside world." As the cloaked figure came closer, the children, Sarah and Tommy, peeked out from behind their parents, their eyes wide with wonder and a touch of fear. The stranger halted a few paces away, his face obscured by shadows, yet they could see the glint of wary eyes surveying their small encampment. "Good people, I mean no harm," he finally spoke, his voice rough as if he had been shouting into the wind for days. "I am a traveler, seeking shelter from the coming storm. I have news that might be of interest to you." John exchanged a look with Mary, pondering the weight of the stranger's words. The community had worked so hard to prepare for the winter, and the notion of sharing their meager provisions was daunting. But the spirit of cooperation had been a cornerstone of their survival thus far. "Come, sit by our fire," John offered, motioning towards the small pile of logs they had gathered. "We have little to spare, but we can share a meal and listen to your news." The stranger nodded appreciatively, joining them by the flickering flames. As he settled onto a log, they could see the weariness etched on his face. He pulled back his hood, revealing a face lined with dirt and exhaustion, yet his eyes held a spark of intelligence that intrigued them. "My name is Elias," he introduced himself, glancing around at the simple structures that comprised their community. "I come from a settlement not far from here, one that is struggling. Our crops have failed, and many of us are facing starvation as winter approaches. We have heard of your preparations and wondered if there might be a way for our communities to aid one another." The settlers listened intently, the crackling fire punctuating the heavy silence that followed. The thought of sharing their resources was daunting, yet the desperation in Elias' voice stirred a sense of empathy within them. They had all faced hardship, and the prospect of others' suffering took root in their hearts. "We're all in this together, aren't we?" Mary finally said, her voice steady as she met Elias' gaze. "If we can help, we will. But what do you propose?" Elias leaned forward, his expression earnest. "If we could trade some of your surplus for seeds and livestock, it would allow us to sustain ourselves through the winter. We have skills in forging tools and crafting goods that might benefit your community as well. Together, we could create a more resilient partnership." John nodded slowly, weighing the offer. It was a calculated risk, yet the idea of fostering a bond with another group could strengthen their survival chances. He glanced at his family, seeking their thoughts. Sarah broke the silence, her youthful curiosity shining through. "If we work together, will we have more stories to tell?" she asked innocently. The adults exchanged smiles. This was what it came down to, after all. The stories of their struggles, their triumphs, and their connections would weave them together through the long winter nights. Tommy, always eager to help, chimed in, "And we could learn about their ways. Maybe they have better ways to keep warm." Elias laughed softly, a sound that seemed to lift the weight of the moment. "Indeed, young one. We all have much to learn from one another. Trust and cooperation can be the cornerstone of our resilience." As the evening wore on, they shared their meals and stories, the fire casting flickering shadows against the trees. Elias spoke of his journey, of the trials faced by his people, and how he had set forth in search of hope. In return, the settlers shared their tales of survival, the early days of building their homes, and the laughter and tears that had brought them closer together. With each story exchanged, the lines of fear and uncertainty began to blur, replaced by the warmth of camaraderie and the realization that they were not alone in their struggles. John felt a surge of hope. Perhaps the arrival of this stranger was serendipitous, a chance for their community to grow stronger in their vulnerability. As the stars began to twinkle in the vast night sky, Mary voiced what they were all thinking. "Elias, we must discuss this further. If we are to form a partnership, we need to bring this to the others and ensure we all agree on how to proceed. Our resources are scarce, but if we work together, perhaps we can create a thriving garden and share the knowledge that comes with it." Elias nodded, the flickering firelight illuminating a determined smile on his face. "I would be honored to meet your community. I can share techniques from my own settlement, and perhaps we can trade not only goods, but also knowledge that could benefit us all." The settlers felt a renewed sense of purpose, the planning for their communal garden now intertwined with the possibility of a larger alliance. It seemed that the harsh winter ahead would not be a solitary struggle, but a collective journey. And perhaps, just perhaps, this would be the catalyst for a legacy that would strengthen their bonds, weaving together their stories into something far greater than they could have anticipated. As they sat together, contemplating the future, John felt a wave of determination wash over him. "Let us prepare for tomorrow, then. We will gather everyone and discuss how we can make this partnership work. Together, we can brave the winter and emerge stronger on the other side." The fire crackled softly as the group made their plans, the warmth of their newfound alliance spreading through their hearts. They were no longer just a small community struggling against the odds. They were now part of something larger, a network of lives interconnected by a shared goal of survival and growth. With the first light of dawn on the horizon, the settlers drifted off to sleep, dreams filled with possibilities and the promise of spring. They had taken the first step towards a brighter future, one shaped not just by their struggles, but by their willingness to reach out, connect, and build a community that would support each other through every storm ahead. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the land, John whispered to Mary, "Tomorrow will bring new challenges, but together we will face whatever comes our way." And so the stage was set for what lay ahead, a gathering of ideas and resources, a melding of hopes and dreams, as they prepared to welcome the stranger's community into their fold, ready to forge a new path together. The heart of the settlement. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm golden glow over the assembled families. John, a sturdy man with hands calloused from years of labor, stood at the forefront, his gaze fixed upon the distant tree line where their potential allies were rumored to emerge. The community was buzzing with anticipation, their spirits intertwined as they prepared to welcome the newcomers. Mary, his wife, busied herself arranging the shared meal, her nimble fingers deftly pulling together what little they had. Meanwhile, the children, Sarah and Tommy, darted between the adults, their laughter ringing like chimes in the evening breeze. The siblings had grown up within these communal walls, understanding the importance of togetherness as deeply as the roots of the ancient oaks that surrounded them. As the sun finally surrendered to the night, the first flickers of torchlight began to appear in the distance. The settlers gathered, their hearts pounding with both hope and apprehension. What would this new alliance mean for them? Would it truly foster the prosperity they sought, or would it bring unforeseen challenges? The leader of the new settlement, a tall woman with striking gray hair named Eliza, stepped forward, her presence commanding yet warm. John made his way to welcome her, extending a hand. "We have been waiting for you," he stated, his voice carrying the weight of the collective hope of the settlers. Eliza smiled, grasping his hand firmly. "And we have traveled far to meet you. Together we can face the winter ahead." Her words breathed life into the settlers' weary spirits, igniting a flicker of optimism. As they shared stories around the fire that night, they spoke of hardships, season changes, and the necessity of unity. The scent of roasting game wafted through the air, mingled with the laughter of children playing nearby. It was a moment of shared humanity, essential in creating the bonds needed for the trials ahead. Over the course of the evening, the settlers discussed their preparations for winter. They explored how they could pool resources to ensure everyone had enough food and shelter. John proposed a communal effort in hunting and gathering supplies, while Mary suggested they create a shared space for sleeping arrangements, a place that could accommodate all families during the toughest months. "We'll need to rethink our bedding," Mary declared, her voice steady. "If we are to share space, we must ensure everyone is comfortable and warm." The new alliance spoke of their own traditions and methods. They, too, had faced the winter's cruel bite and had developed unique approaches to survival. Eliza shared stories of how her community fashioned beds from the materials they had on hand: straw, animal skins, and leaves. Her words sparked inspiration among the settlers. "Perhaps we can learn from one another," John suggested, envisioning a network of intertwining techniques to strengthen their survival. As the night wore on, they shared more than just food. They exchanged knowledge and history, intertwining their lives together like the roots of trees beneath their feet. It was in this sacred exchange that they found a semblance of family among strangers. However, the specter of winter loomed large. Each family knew that without proper bedding, communal or otherwise, they would be vulnerable to illnesses that could spread like wildfire in close quarters. The conversation shifted to the practicalities of their proposed alliance. Tommy, ever curious, raised his hand. "What if we made our beds together? Each family can bring what they can spare, and we can help build the best place to sleep." His innocent suggestion sparked a ripple of laughter and agreement. "That is a splendid idea, young one," Eliza replied, her eyes twinkling. "A project that will unite our families and ensure we are all safe and well rested." As the fire crackled and the stars twinkled above, the settlers and their new allies began to plan. They envisioned a communal space, one that would not only provide warmth and comfort, but also serve as a hub for shared stories, laughter, and the cultivation of new traditions. The nights spent in this space would be punctuated by the rich tapestry of new stories woven together from both groups, reinforcing the bonds formed in the light of the flickering flames. The next morning, they set out to gather materials for their new communal space. Families made their way through the thick underbrush, searching for suitable timber and soft grasses. Each member contributed in their own way. While the elders shared stories, the children played and collected leaves, and the women discussed how to create sturdy bedding using the resources at hand. The work was hard, but it was joyful. They sang songs as they worked, the melodies weaving through the trees, carrying their hopes into the crisp winter air. As the sun reached its zenith, the foundations of their communal bed were taking shape, merging the efforts and spirits of both settlements into something greater than the sum of its parts. With each passing day, the project fostered deeper connections. John found himself sharing more of his thoughts with Eliza, discussing not just survival strategies but dreams for their shared future. Mary and Eliza exchanged recipes, combining their knowledge of herbal remedies to craft tonics that would boost their family's health. Sarah and Tommy formed bonds with the other children, their laughter bridging the gaps of unfamiliarity. As they worked together, the settlers began to envision their new life as one intertwined community rather than two separate groups. They shared meals, stories, and the labor of building a place that would embody their collective efforts. Each evening they congregated around the fire, sharing tales of their pasts, their dreams, and the more profound understanding of what it meant to stand together in the face of adversity. Yet, beneath this newfound unity, whispers of old rivalries and distrust echoed faintly. There were those among the settlers who remained skeptical of the alliance, questioning whether it would truly benefit them or lead to unforeseen consequences. John was aware of these murmurs, feeling the weight of responsibility heavier upon his shoulders as he navigated the delicate balance of fostering unity while recognizing the fears that lingered. As the first frost kissed the earth, the communal space was finally complete. With bedding constructed from soft grasses and lined with fur, it stood as a testament to their hard work and newfound bonds. The settlers gathered for a final meeting, a celebration of what they had achieved, and a commitment to face the winter together. With spirits high and hearts united, they realized that this alliance was not merely about survival. It was about creating a home where every member contributed to the fabric of their community. They raised their glasses of warm cider, toasting to a future filled with hope, camaraderie, and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of nature's trials. As they cheered, a sudden gust of wind swept through the gathering, a reminder of the winter yet to come. The settlers understood that while they had taken tremendous steps forward, the real tests lay ahead. The strength of their alliance would be put to the ultimate test as adversities struck and old fears threatened to resurface. How they would navigate this new chapter remained uncertain, but they were determined to face it together. With each passing day, the snow accumulated, transforming the landscape into a serene yet challenging environment. The settlers worked tirelessly to fortify their homes against the cold, gathering wood for fires and ensuring they had enough provisions to last through the winter months. John, a steadfast leader in the community, organized daily meetings for families to discuss their needs and strategies. Mary, John's wife, took it upon herself to create a communal herbal remedy chest. She collected various herbs from their surroundings and demonstrated to the other women how these could be used for common ailments. The act of sharing knowledge about healing not only improved the health of the community, but also brought the families closer together. As the snow continued to fall, a sense of urgency filled the air. The settlers knew they had to act quickly. They formed small groups to gather food supplies from the nearby woods, hunting for game, and collecting nuts and berries that might still be available. Meanwhile, others focused on preserving food using techniques they had learned from generations past. Sarah and Tommy were often sent out with their father to collect firewood from the nearby forest. This was not only a necessary chore, but also a chance to bond as a family. John would share stories of their ancestors, detailing how they survived similar winters and the importance of community. The children listened intently, their imaginations igniting with visions of their family's resilience. As night fell, the settlers would gather around a large communal fire. It became a tradition to share stories of hope and courage, reminding each other of their shared purpose. These gatherings helped alleviate the chill that hung in the air, both literally and metaphorically. The warmth of the fire matched the warmth in their hearts, as community spirit flourished even during the coldest hours. With every story told, the settlers grew more aware of their interdependence. They recognized that their survival relied not just on individual effort, but on collective action. As they exchanged tales, they also traded food, blankets, and supplies, ensuring that no family went without. This reinforced their alliance and strengthened their resolve against the harsh winter. One especially harsh evening, with winds howling outside, a newcomer arrived at the settlement. Cloaked in a heavy coat, the figure emerged from the darkness, bringing news of another settlement that had faced dire circumstances. The sudden introduction of this stranger stirred both anxiety and curiosity among the settlers. They welcomed her into their circle, eager to learn what she could share. The woman introduced herself as Eliza, a healer who had traveled from a neighboring settlement struggling to survive the winter. She spoke of her community's dwindling resources and their need to find allies. The settlers listened intently, realizing that their alliance could be a lifeline not only to themselves, but to others as well. Eliza shared her knowledge of food preservation and herbal medicine, adding value to their already established practices. Eliza's arrival prompted another discussion about the potential for forming a larger alliance, one that could extend beyond their settlement. They gathered resources, plans, and hopes. The settlers began to visualize a network of support that would stretch over the landscape, a tapestry of communities bound together by shared survival. As the discussions unfolded, it became clear that they needed to prepare for an organized visit to Eliza's settlement. John proposed a plan to send a group to assess their situation and establish a more formal alliance. With a collective nod of agreement, the settlers made preparations, readying themselves for the journey that would not just be a search for resources, but also a strengthening of their bonds. The night ended with the settlers feeling invigorated by Eliza's presence and their newfound purpose. They recognized that the cold winter was not merely a barrier, but also an opportunity to unite with others in a way that would fortify them all. The children, filled with excitement, whispered stories of what their potential collaboration could look like, dreaming of a robust community that could withstand any storm. As they settled into their communal sleeping arrangements that night, the settlers felt a renewed sense of hope. Each family tucked into their bedding made from straw and leaves, comforted by the warmth of their shared dreams and intentions. They slept, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also the promise of solidarity in their efforts to survive and thrive together during the winter months ahead. As dawn broke over the horizon, the air was crisp with the first signs of winter. John, Mary, Sarah, and Tommy stood at the edge of their settlement, their breath visible in the chilly morning air. The quiet anticipation of the day ahead filled them with a mix of excitement and anxiety. They had spent weeks preparing for this journey, gathering supplies, packing provisions, and discussing what this alliance could mean for their community. Their small homes, previously buzzing with the chores and laughter of daily life, now felt like a quiet sanctuary as they contemplated the unknown. The path to the neighboring settlement was rugged and winding, flanked by trees that had begun to shed their leaves, creating a mosaic of orange and brown at their feet. With each step, the family felt the weight of their hopes resting upon their shoulders. Sarah, the eldest child, was particularly eager, her imagination racing with possibilities of new friends and stories yet untold. Tommy, on the other hand, kept glancing back at their home, a place filled with memories of warmth and laughter, his small hands gripping his mother's cloak tightly. Mary noticed her son's unease, and she knelt beside him, her voice soft against the backdrop of their journey. "This is an adventure, Tommy. Just think of all the stories we can share and the help we will find." She smiled, trying to infuse courage into his heart. As they walked, John took the lead, his sturdy figure pushing through the underbrush. He had always been the protector, the provider, and his resolve strengthened the family's spirits. "Remember, we're doing this to ensure our survival. The winter will be long, "And we need each other now more than ever," he reminded them, his tone grave yet hopeful. The trek was arduous, with the terrain becoming increasingly challenging. They traversed rocky hills and crossed streams that had begun to freeze at the edges. With every obstacle, John and Mary exchanged glances filled with determination. They were not just walking for themselves, but for the community they had built together, one that thrived on collective strength and support. After hours of walking, they finally spotted the neighboring settlement in the distance. It appeared more vibrant than their own, with smoke gently rising from chimneys and laughter echoing across the fields. As they approached, the settlers there noticed the newcomers and began to gather, their faces a mix of curiosity and welcome. A tall man stepped forward, introducing himself as Samuel, the leader of this new settlement. His voice was warm, and his presence exuded a sense of security. "Welcome. We've been expecting you," he said, extending a hand to John, who grasped it firmly, feeling an instant connection. Mary stepped forward next, and Samuel nodded in acknowledgement. "You have made a wise choice in coming here. Together, we can face the harshness of winter with unity." They exchanged pleasantries, sharing stories of their challenges and triumphs. As daylight waned, they gathered around a fire where food was shared and laughter mingled with the crackling of the flames. The warmth of the fire seemed to melt away the worries that had accompanied them on their journey. As night fell, they discussed plans for the winter, pooling resources and strategies to ensure that both communities could thrive. Samuel talked about the importance of shared knowledge and skills, emphasizing how they could learn from one another, one settlement excelling in hunting, the other in gathering. The settlers spoke of their traditional practices, highlighting the value of storytelling and herbal remedies that had supported their families through tough times. As the night deepened, John felt a sense of hope blossoming within him. The alliance was more than a mere agreement. It was a promise of interdependence and shared survival. This newfound connection might just be the key to weathering the winter's harsh grip. Mary, watching her children engage with others, felt a surge of gratitude. They were no longer solely responsible for their family's well-being, but part of a larger network, one that would carry them through the cold months ahead. As she glanced at Sarah and Tommy, she saw the excitement reflected in their eyes, a mirror of her own hopes. As the fire dwindled to embers, Samuel proposed that they each share a story from their past, an experience that brought them to this moment. Each tale was woven with threads of hardship, resilience, and the unwavering human spirit. They discovered common bonds in the stories of loss, love, and survival, solidifying their connection further. The night slowly drifted into silence, with the stars twinkling overhead. John, feeling the camaraderie, leaned in closer to Samuel. "What's our plan for tomorrow?" he asked, the flickering light of the fire casting shadows across their faces. Samuel replied, "First, we will gather everyone and discuss how to pool our resources. Then we'll start mapping out tasks for the winter, ensuring everyone knows their roles. We need to work together to make this alliance fruitful." With the agreement in place, the settlers soon retired to their respective homes, filled with a sense of belonging and hope for the future. As John and Mary tucked their children into bed in the communal dwelling provided by the new settlement, they whispered words of encouragement to each other, embracing the warmth of family and community once more. As sleep descended upon them, entwined with the sound of distant laughter and crackling wood, the settlers felt the first moments of true security since the onset of winter. They had taken the brave step of forging a new alliance, one that promised to change the course of their lives forever. The days to come, they would face trials and tribulations, but they would do so together, with the bonds of friendship and shared purpose woven strong against the cold. With that thought, John drifted into a peaceful sleep, content in the knowledge that they were no longer alone. As the first light of dawn peeked through the windows, illuminating their faces with its golden hue, the settlers prepared for what lay ahead, an event that would solidify their bond and test their resolve. What they would discover next could redefine their understanding of community and survival, setting the stage for the challenges that awaited them in the harsh winter ahead. The community gathered in the town square, their breath visible in the chilly air as the first snowflakes began to fall, transforming their familiar landscape into a glistening wonderland. Children scampered about, catching the flakes on their tongues, while the adults exchanged stories of past winters, laughter mingling with the crisp wind. John, Mary, and their children, Sarah and Tommy, stood among the crowd, feeling a sense of hope permeate their hearts. The alliance they formed with the neighboring settlement was still fresh, and they were eager to fuse their resources and wisdom to face the harsh winter. As the snowy evening wore on, John felt a sense of camaraderie with the other men. They discussed the importance of fortifying their homes against the cold and how they would share hunting grounds to ensure ample food supply. Meanwhile, Mary and the other women congregated, discussing plans for communal kitchens where they could prepare hearty meals together. The prospect of shared resources brought a sense of relief. The thought of not having to bear the brunt of survival alone was a comforting balm. However, as the night deepened, the wind began to howl, and the snow intensified, swirling around them like a veil. The settlers' laughter dwindled as they sensed a change in the atmosphere. The excitement of the day gave way to underlying tension, the first inklings of the storm that was brewing. They retreated to their homes, gathering close together as each family prepared for the coming challenges. Their small home, John and Mary, huddled together with Sarah and Tommy, reminiscing about their past winters. They recalled the dreadful nights spent shivering on straw and leaves, each child nestled against an adult for warmth. Mary shared stories of the herbal remedies her mother used to ward off sickness during the harshest months. "We must remember those traditions," she said, looking at her children with resolve. "They're as vital as any blanket we can find." The night wore on, but outside the storm raged, obscuring the world in white. Within their walls, the family felt a fragile warmth, bound together not just by love, but also by the realization that they were now part of a larger community. This unity would be their greatest asset against the frigid winds. As the sun rose the next day, it illuminated a transformed world. The storm had blanketed the settlement in heavy snow, making the familiar pathways into treacherous routes. The settlers emerged from their homes, bundled in layers of clothing, ready to assess the damage and see how they might help one another. John took the lead, rallying the men to clear the pathways, while Mary organized the women to gather supplies for a communal meal, intending to lift spirits amidst the bitter cold. The day was filled with hard labor, laughter, and an unwavering sense of solidarity that grew stronger with each passing hour. But the storm was more than just the weather. It was the embodiment of the challenges that lay ahead for this newly formed alliance. As the days turned into weeks, the settlers navigated their way through the winter, growing closer as they shared resources and knowledge. They took turns checking in on one another's families, ensuring no one was left without support. The act of sharing food, stories, and warmth brought them closer than any single family could have ever been. It was a lesson in interdependence that few had anticipated when they first decided to ally with one another. However, just as they began to find their rhythm, a troubling illness swept through the settlement. It started with the children, who had spent too much time outdoors playing in the snow, and before long, The adults were affected as well. The harsh reality of their situation set in as John and Mary watched their children cough and shiver, unable to escape the cold grip of the illness. It was then that they realized that while they had bolstered their physical resilience through shared resources, they needed to turn to the traditional practices of herbal remedies and storytelling that had sustained their families in the past. The evenings, they gathered around the fire, echoing the traditions of their ancestors. Mary began to share the old tales she had learned from her mother about how the first settlers survived similar seasons. She spoke of the herbs that could strengthen the body against the cold and disease, and soon the women began to work together, crafting potions and remedies to help their families heal. They infused their brews with local plants, rediscovering the power of nature that had been overshadowed by their modern worries. Yet the illness did not relent easily. Despite their efforts, they watched as some of their neighbors struggled. Families that had been strong now seemed frail and weak. The alliance that had once felt so promising now faced a test that no one had anticipated. Would they be able to come together to fight this invisible enemy? As they rallied together, a sense of urgency fell over the settlement. They needed to act swiftly if they were to save their community. The settlers organized task forces to gather herbs, collect wood for fires, and cook nourishing meals. They turned their attention to the sick, offering help without hesitation, and as they did, a new bond forged in crisis began to take shape. The storm outside had passed, but a different kind of storm was brewing within their homes, a storm of resilience and unity brought on by the shared struggle of survival. It was a reminder that their greatest strength lay in their ability to come together, in both joy and adversity. As they set to work, determined to overcome the illness, they knew that the trials they faced would either break them apart or bind them closer together than ever before. And just as they embarked on this collective journey of healing, a new arrival appeared at the edge of the settlement, bringing news that would change everything once more. Little did they know, this new figure held the keys to both salvation and destruction as they prepared for the next phase of their struggle. The traveler, a tall figure cloaked in a weathered garment, stepped into the clearing where the community had gathered. His presence was both commanding and unsettling. The children, playing nearby, paused in their games and watched the newcomer with wide eyes, instinctively sensing the gravity of the moment. John, the family patriarch, braced himself, glancing at Mary, whose brow furrowed with concern. "Who are you?" John called out, his voice steady but laced with caution. "I am Elias," the traveler replied, his voice deep and melodic, a stark contrast to the harshness of the wilderness around them. "I come from the north, a place where the winter bites harder than the cold winds of your lands. I bear news that can alter your fate." Tension rippled through the crowd. The settlers had spent long months preparing for the winter, forging bonds with each other and building their defenses against both nature and disease. Now, the prospect of outside influence hung heavily in the air. Elias continued, "The settlements further north have faced a terrible affliction, one that spreads like wildfire. But I also bring word of a remedy, a rare herb found only at the peak of the Frost Mountain. With it, you can protect your families if you dare join me on the journey." The community murmured amongst themselves. Mary leaned closer to John, her voice barely above a whisper. "Should we trust him? What if his intentions are not as noble as they seem?" John felt the weight of her gaze, the uncertainty mirrored in her eyes. While the thought of a potential alliance with northern settlements was appealing, the risks involved were daunting. Together, they had fought against adversity, and now they were faced with a choice: to embrace an unknown future or to cling to the safety of their familiar struggles. Elias, sensing the hesitation, stepped forward. "I understand your fears, but you must know that strength lies in unity. The North has faced its trials, but if we ally, we can share resources and knowledge. Your beds, the improvements you have made, can be fortified with the wisdom I offer." The mention of their communal beds sparked a flicker of hope among the settlers. They had worked tirelessly to better their sleeping conditions, believing that each enhancement contributed to their resilience. John realized that perhaps the travelers' presence was not just a threat, but an opportunity. "What say you, fellow settlers?" he called out, looking at the faces of his community, hoping to gauge their reactions. "Shall we consider Elias' proposal?" Tommy, who had been listening intently, piped up. "But what if we lose more than we gain? What if we endanger ourselves by trusting a stranger?" John nodded at his son's concerns, but also recognized the wisdom in their current situation. The illness had already begun to weaken their ranks, and winter's chill was just beginning to settle in. "We are stronger together," he declared. "Let us hear what he has to say before deciding." Elias smiled, a flicker of relief crossing his face. He reached into his cloak and pulled out a small pouch, opening it to reveal dried leaves and roots of various hues. "This is the herb I speak of. With it, we can concoct remedies that will protect against illness and restore vitality. We can also learn from each other's experiences." The community members leaned in closer, curiosity piqued. The prospect of healing and shared knowledge was enticing. Mary, still wary, turned to her husband. "We must tread carefully, John. If we agree, it will change everything." The settlers began an impassioned discussion, weighing the pros and cons, their voices rising and falling like the wind that rustled through the trees surrounding them. Some favored the idea of joining Elias on a journey to the north, while others shied away, fearing the unknown. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden hues over the community, John realized the moment was pivotal. He needed to inspire confidence in his people, to unite them in the face of uncertainty. "Listen, everyone," he said, raising his voice above the commotion. "This is not merely about herbs or alliances, it is about our very future. We have built a life here, one that relies on our commitment to each other. We must decide if we are willing to extend that commitment beyond our current borders. If we trust Elias and learn from him, we may very well ensure the survival of our families." His words resonated through the crowd. Gradually, nods of agreement began to surface, and the discussion shifted from skepticism to curiosity. The idea of embarking on a journey filled with potential ignited something deep within the settlers' spirits. Finally, after hours of deliberation, they reached a consensus. "We will go with you, Elias," John announced, feeling a surge of resolve within him. "But we will do it as a community, together." Elias smiled broadly, sensing the shift in the group's energy. "Then prepare yourselves, for tomorrow we begin our journey to the north." As the evening descended, the settlers gathered around the fire, the warmth of the flames contrasting the chill in the air. They shared stories, laughter, and plans for the journey ahead, the fears of the past slowly fading into the background. The travelers' presence had sparked a new chapter for the community, one filled with possibilities. But doubts lingered in the corners of Mary's mind. As she watched her husband and children engage with their neighbors, she knew the path ahead would not be easy. The stakes were higher than ever, and trust was a fragile bond. As night fell, she sought solace in the familiar patterns of the stars, pondering what awaited them on their journey and how it would change their lives forever. The community had shared resources and stories, fostering bonds that deepened as winter approached. John gathered the men to discuss the next steps in their alliance, emphasizing the importance of preparedness. They decided to collect firewood and food supplies before the snow buried the land. Meanwhile, Mary and the other women organized a communal meal, a moment of joy amidst the uncertainty. As they sat together, laughter echoed through the cold air, but beneath the surface, a sense of anxiety lingered. Tommy leaned against his mother, wide-eyed, as Sarah listened intently to the tales of old. The stories often spoke of spirits and omens, and tonight felt heavy with meaning. "What if the alliance isn't what it seems?" Sarah whispered to her brother, her voice barely above the crackle of the fire. "What if they bring danger instead of help?" Tommy shrugged, glancing at the adults. He wanted to believe in the strength of their new friends, but the ominous clouds gathering on the horizon mirrored his sister's worries. As they finished their meal, John stood up, his voice steady despite the chill. "We must stay vigilant. The alliance offers hope, but we can't ignore the signs. Prepare for the worst while hoping for the best." The settlers nodded in agreement, their expressions a mix of determination and fear. They knew the winter was long and harsh, and the alliance would be tested. The night wore on, and the fire crackled softly as they returned to their small homes. Sighed, Mary tucked her children into bed, the soft straw providing a meager comfort against the cold. She brushed her fingers over their foreheads, whispering stories of bravery and warmth. The children drowsed, lulled into a dream world where danger was just a shadow, far removed from their cozy beds. Outside, the wind howled, carrying whispers of uncertainty as the settlers nestled into their communal homes, their minds racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. They were united by their fears and hopes, yet the darkness of the unknown hovered just out of sight, ready to reveal itself when they least expected it. The following morning brought a bitter cold, and the settlers awoke to find the landscape transformed into a winter wonderland. However, the beauty of the snow masked the lingering tension beneath the surface. As they ventured outside, the settlers prepared for a day of work, chopping wood and checking traps. They needed to ensure their provisions would last through the winter. John and a few of the men ventured out to meet their new allies, who were approaching with wagons filled with supplies. The excitement was palpable, but so was the unease. When the two groups met, greetings were exchanged, and the promise of shared resources filled the air. The rival settlement appeared strong and resourceful, but John felt a pang of caution. As they shook hands, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, an instinct screaming at him to tread carefully. Back at home, Mary noticed some of the younger settlers whispering nervously amongst themselves. Fueled by their imaginations, the stories of old began to resurface. They debated whether the other settlement had its own hidden agenda, fueled by legends of betrayal and treachery from the very land they were trying to tame. As the day progressed, the excitement of the alliance began to shift, tainted by seeds of doubt and fear. The settlers returned to their daily routines, trying to balance hope with anxiety. They prepared for the coming winter, but the shadows of uncertainty crept in like the chill of the evening air. As night fell, the settlers gathered once more around the fire. The warmth wrapped around them, but the flickering flames cast dancing shadows that seemed to whisper secrets. Tommy and Sarah sat close together, their minds racing with thoughts of the new alliance. "What if they aren't here to help us?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible above the crackle of the fire. "We have to trust them, don't we?" Tommy replied, though doubt lingered in his tone. Mary overheard their conversation and felt a stir of apprehension. The alliance could be their salvation, but it also had the potential to become their undoing. She urged her children to focus on the present, to enjoy the warmth of their home and the love of their family. Yet in her heart, she knew the foreboding feeling wouldn't fade easily. The distance, the howl of the wind seemed to beckon them, carrying with it the weight of the unknown. The settlers were on the brink of a new chapter, one that promised unity but also hinted at unforeseen challenges. As the days grew shorter and the nights colder, they would have to confront not only the elements but also the truths hidden within their own community and beyond. The alliance they had hoped would solidify their strength might instead test their very foundation. Only time would reveal the truth behind their new companions as the winter tightened its grip and the shadows began to stir with intent. With the frost settling in for the long haul, the settlers prepared to face whatever came next. They gathered their strength, their unity, and their courage, but the dark omen loomed ever closer, waiting for the moment to strike. As the first full moon of winter rose high in the sky, illuminating a world cloaked in white, the settlers felt a growing unease. They had forged an alliance, but at what cost? And would that cost come due before the thaw of spring? Their hearts, they knew the battles ahead would test their resolve, their trust, and their very survival. The question hung in the air like a haunting melody, waiting to be answered in the days to come. The chill of winter settled in, blanketing the settlement in a layer of white, while the glowing fires within homes provided much-needed warmth. John and Mary, alongside their children Sarah and Tommy, had spent the previous weeks preparing for the harsh season ahead, utilizing every resource available. The decision to ally with another settlement had been met with mixed emotions, hope intertwined with anxiety. As they gathered in their communal space, the atmosphere was heavy with the scent of simmering stews and the sound of laughter, yet an undercurrent of unease permeated the air. John, ever the pragmatic leader, had called a meeting to discuss the logistics of the alliance. "We must ensure our resources are shared wisely," he stated, his authoritative tone cutting through the chatter. "These new allies will bring their strengths, but we must not forget our own limitations." The settlers nodded, their faces illuminated by the flickering lights of the fire, each one contemplating their own circumstances. Mary, sitting close with her children, watched as the community rallied around John's words. "We'll need to set up a schedule for sharing supplies. Perhaps we can designate days for trade and ensure everyone has what they need to survive," she suggested, her maternal instincts kicking in. As plans were laid out for the alliance, Sarah and Tommy darted around the circle, their laughter momentarily lifting the weight of worry from the adults' shoulders. However, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting shadows that danced along the walls of their homes, the atmosphere shifted. The settlers began to notice the quietness outside. The usual sounds of animals and the wind had hushed, as if the world itself was holding its breath. That night, as they settled into their bedding made from animal skins, straw, and leaves, an unusual silence enveloped the settlement. John lay awake, troubled by the uncertainty of what was to come. Thoughts raced through his mind. Had they truly prepared enough? Were they ready for the challenges that accompanied their new alliance? The communal sleeping arrangement provided warmth, yet it also fostered a sense of vulnerability. He could hear Mary whispering soft reassurances to the children, but it did little to ease his concern. Meanwhile, in the shadows outside, figures moved stealthily, watching the settlers through the thin veil of darkness. They were the remnants of a rival group, their faces concealed beneath hoods, plotting their next move. Whispers floated on the cold air, carrying hints of betrayal and dark intentions. The alliance that the settlers hoped would save them was already under threat, unbeknownst to them. As dawn broke, illuminating the crisp landscape, the settlers gathered for breakfast. The warmth of the sun's rays felt like a promise of hope, yet the memory of the restless night lingered. They shared stories over a simple meal, emphasizing their interdependence as families and communities. Mary often reminded her children of the importance of unity, saying, "Together we are strong, and together we will face whatever comes our way." Little did they know, the challenges were not merely the harsh winter, but the darkness that had infiltrated their lives, intent on disrupting the fragile fabric of their alliance. The settlers' strength lay in their ability to adapt and support each other. But could that withstand the coming storm? As the days passed, the settlers continued to work diligently, repairing homes, stocking up on food, and looking forward to the arrival of their allies. The first snowfall had brought a sense of urgency. Time was running out before the full force of winter descended. However, with each passing day, the presence of malevolence seemed to grow more palpable. The children began to sense something amiss. Shadows moved just beyond their sight, and the stories once shared for comfort now took on darker meanings. One evening, while the adults discussed the impending alliance and ways to fortify their defenses, Tommy approached his father, his small hand tugging at John's sleeve. "Daddy, can we tell a story tonight? One about brave settlers who defeated the dark things?" His eyes sparkled with innocence, yet there was an unspoken weight behind his words. The adults paused, exchanging glances filled with concern. John knelt beside his son, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Of course, son. But perhaps we should tell a story about how we can work together to keep each other safe." The room erupted in laughter, but it was tinged with an understanding of the gravity of their situation. They shared tales of courage, bravery, and the unbreakable bonds of family that had seen them through challenges before. The night ended with a sense of camaraderie, and though doubts lingered at the back of their minds, the settlers fortified their resolve to protect one another. They decided they would meet with their allies the following day, determined to forge an unshakable bond that would protect them all. However, unbeknownst to them, as they prepared for the meeting, the figures from the dark were already laying their plans, seeking to shatter the alliance before it even began. The settlers' desire for connection and support would soon be tested, not by the winter's chill, but by the very betrayal they had been warned about. As the sun rose on the day of the meeting with their new allies, the settlers felt a renewed sense of hope. They donned their warmest clothes, gathered their supplies, and set out toward the designated meeting point. The air was crisp, and the snow crunched underfoot, a sound that felt both comforting and foreboding. While they walked, Mary took a moment to pull John aside. "Do you think we're ready for this? What if they come with intentions we do not expect?" She looked into his eyes, searching for reassurance. John, trying to mask his own uncertainty, replied, "We will be prepared. We've faced challenges before, and we will face this one together." As they approached the clearing where they would first meet the newcomers, their breaths mingled in the cold air, a physical representation of their unity. Yet as they reached the site, the clearing was eerily quiet, and the expected faces were nowhere to be seen. A sudden chill swept through the trees, sending shivers down their spines. It felt as if the world was once more holding its breath. Just then, a rustle in the bushes caught their attention, and every settler instinctively turned, their hearts pounding as the shadows lengthened around them. The true test of their alliance was about to begin, and they stood on the precipice of discovery, unaware of the darkness that loomed just beyond their sight. As tension hung in the air, the settlers prepared to confront whatever awaited them, knowing that the bonds they had forged would soon be put to the ultimate test. The next chapter of their survival story was about to unfold, and the shadows crept closer, ready to make their move. As the snowflakes drifted down and blanketed the land in white, a sense of both tranquility and trepidation filled the air. John, Mary, and their children, Sarah and Tommy, gathered around the fire in their small home, the flickering flames casting warm shadows against the wooden walls. The community had worked tirelessly to prepare for winter, sharing resources and knowledge to ensure their survival. Yet, beneath the surface of this camaraderie, a tension simmered. One evening, as they sat together, a knock echoed through the stillness. It was Mr. Carter, the leader of the neighboring settlement, his face drawn and serious. "We need to talk," he said, his voice barely a whisper above the crackling fire. As the families exchanged worried glances, Mr. Carter explained, "The winter is harsher than we anticipated. Supplies are dwindling, and we may have to take more drastic measures than we discussed." John felt a knot tighten in his stomach. They had already pooled their resources, sharing food and tools, but the reality of the situation loomed heavier than the snow outside. "What do you propose?" he asked, trying to mask his concern. "We should consider hunting outside of our usual grounds. There may be risks, but it's our best chance to sustain everyone through the cold months ahead," Mr. Carter replied, his voice steady but urgent. The families sat in silence, pondering the implications. Hunting beyond their borders could strain their fragile alliance if tensions with other settlers flared. The settlers had always prioritized cooperation over competition. They depended on one another for survival. But the fear of starvation was a powerful motivator. Mary broke the silence first, her brow furrowed. "Perhaps we could organize a group to scout the area and see how dire our situation truly is. If we approach this together, we can mitigate the risks," she suggested, looking around the room. The others nodded, each sharing worried expressions, but understanding the necessity of action. They decided to meet at dawn, gathering the able-bodied men and women to discuss their strategy. As they prepared for bed that night, the children's laughter echoed faintly, a small reminder of the joy that still flickered amid uncertainty. The next morning, the sun struggled to break through thick clouds, casting a dim light over the settlement. The community gathered, the air buzzing with anxious energy. John stood at the forefront, his voice steady. "Today, we will assess our surroundings. Unity is our strength, and together we can face whatever lies ahead." As they set out, the world around them transformed into a winter wonderland, but it was a harsh and unforgiving beauty. The group trudged through the snow, their breath visible in the chill. The children played nearby, their joy a stark contrast to the worry etched into the faces of the adults. After hours of scouting, the scouts returned with mixed reports. Some found signs of deer in the distant woods, while others reported an unsettling encounter with another group of settlers who were equally desperate. Tensions were fraying, the thin veneer of cooperation threatened by the primal instinct to survive. That night, as they gathered once more around the fire, John spoke of the importance of trust. "We cannot lose sight of our shared purpose. If we do not maintain our alliance, we risk falling apart," he urged. Mary added, "We should also gather what herbs and resources we can find. Traditional remedies may help keep us healthy as we face these challenges." The families discussed ways to bolster their health and morale. The storytelling tradition was invoked, with each person sharing tales of their past and dreams for the future. As laughter rang out against the backdrop of howling winds, they found solace in one another's company despite the grim circumstances. As the days passed, the settlers continued their hunt, venturing further than they ever had before. They learned to navigate the treacherous terrain, relying on each other's strengths. But with each expedition, the risks grew, and the strain on their alliance was palpable. One evening, as the fire crackled and the wind howled outside, a decision was made. They would make one final push into the deeper woods, hoping to secure enough meat to last through the harshest part of winter. The group prepared, their faces set with determination. But fear of the unknown loomed like a shadow over their hearts. As they lay in bed that night, John couldn't shake the feeling that their greatest challenge was yet to come. The darkness outside was not merely the absence of light, it felt alive, stirring with anticipation. Meanwhile, the children's laughter faded into quiet murmurs, their innocence untouched by the weight of impending choices. As they drifted into an uneasy sleep, dreams of warmth and safety mingled with visions of what lay beyond their fragile settlement. But as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, it was not warmth that greeted them. A chilling howl echoed through the trees, sending shivers down their spines. The night had stirred something in the woods, something that would test the very bonds they had fought to strengthen. It was a reminder that the true tests of their alliance lay ahead, and the darkness lurking beyond the tree line could change everything they held dear. With the world changing around them and their hopes hanging by a thread, the settlers braced themselves for the trials to come. They had forged an alliance, but would it be strong enough to face the looming darkness? Annays! The snow blanketed the land. John stepped outside their small home, taking a deep breath of the crisp, cold air. He watched as Sarah and Tommy eagerly caught snowflakes on their tongues, their laughter echoing against the quiet backdrop of the world transformed by winter. Mary, busy indoors, prepared a warm herbal tea, a tradition that had been passed down through generations, rich with the flavors of the land around them. The fragrant steam wafted through the air, bringing a sense of comfort to their chilly home. Side, the communal spirit was alive. Settlers from the new alliance gathered in their home, sharing tales of their past hardships and future hopes. John had invited the neighboring family, the Thompsons, to discuss how they might best combine their resources this winter. The children played together, creating snowmen in the yard, while the adults deliberated over the makeshift table strewn with maps and sketches of potential strategies for survival. Mary interjected with a soft voice, her intuition guiding her thoughts. "We should focus on strengthening our hunting grounds. The deer have been moving closer to the river, and we could set traps and use snares to catch them. The meat will keep us nourished through the cold months ahead." Mr. Thompson nodded in agreement, his rugged face lighting up with understanding. "Aye, and we can set up a smokehouse to preserve what we catch. The herbs we've gathered will help season the meat, and we can dry some for teas, too. It will not only nourish us, but boost our health as well, especially with the kids around." The conversation flowed like the river they depended on, each voice adding to the tapestry of their collective knowledge. They spoke of firewood, shared stories of old remedies that had healed families in dire times, and planned for communal gatherings to stave off the isolation winter often brought. As dusk approached and the flames flickered in the fireplace, casting a warm glow on the faces of the settlers, John felt a swell of gratitude. This unity reminded him of how crucial it was to foster bonds with others, especially when faced with the unknown. He glanced at his children, their eyes bright with excitement, and thought of the importance of storytelling that kept their spirits high and fears at bay. Outside, the snow continued to fall, gentle yet relentless. Each flake seemed a whisper of promise, reminding them that they were not alone. The settlers would endure together through trials and tribulations, and through this, their community would grow stronger. As the meeting drew to a close and the guests departed, John and Mary stood side by side, watching their children drift off to sleep in the warm communal bedding they had crafted. Mary turned to John, her brow furrowed with concern. What if the alliance isn't enough? We need more than just plans. We need a way to ensure our safety from the wild animals prowling closer as food becomes scarce. John nodded, knowing she was right. The forest held dangers that their unity could not prevent, and as winter deepened, those dangers would loom larger. We must also think of defense. Perhaps we should prepare the children and ourselves to stand watch at night, ensuring we hear any movement. We can use the dogs to help alert us too, he replied, the weight of their circumstances settling heavily upon him. The night wore on, filled with the sounds of the crackling fire and the rhythmic breathing of their sleeping children. Each family member felt the urgency of the situation, the need to be vigilant and resourceful. As they laid down to rest, Mary clutched her herbal pouch tightly, wishing for peace and safety throughout the long winter nights ahead. The days that followed, they worked diligently, fortifying their homes, setting traps for deer, and preparing their defenses. John and his fellow settlers took turns standing watch at night, their eyes scanning the darkness for any hint of danger, while Mary tended to the children and offered them stories of courage and resilience to keep their spirits high. The alliance, although new, began to feel like a lifeline as they shared responsibilities, but uncertainty lingered in the shadows of their hearts. Each day brought more challenges, and as they faced the bitter cold head-on, the settlers knew that the real test of their unity was yet to come. The snow continued to pile high, and with it, the pressure of survival weighed on them. In the face of adversity, John gathered the settlers once more, calling for a community meeting to discuss their next steps forward. He addressed their fears head-on, voicing the unspoken worries they all held. We must remain vigilant, but we also need a plan for when the food supplies dwindle and the wild animals come looking for easier prey. This winter we must not only survive, we must thrive. With determination, the settlers began to forge a more robust strategy, one that would intertwine their hearts and resources like the threads of a strong quilt. They would need to rely on each other's strengths to create a united front against the hostile forces of nature. As they strategized, John felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. They could rise to the occasion, bound by their shared experiences and dreams of a fruitful spring. But even as plans were laid, the shadows of winter whispered of the challenges that lay ahead, and the community prepared to confront whatever awaited them in these unforgiving months. Soon, the settlers would face a trial that would test not only their alliances, but their very will to survive. And as they set their plans into motion, the frost-bitten breath of the forest seemed to promise that a storm was brewing on the horizon, one they could only hope to weather together. The moment the first snowflakes danced down from the sky, the settlers gathered beneath a large oak tree, their spirits lifted in celebration. They had forged an alliance with the nearby settlement, an agreement that promised shared resources and mutual support through the harsh winter. John, with a gleam in his eye, raised a makeshift mug filled with hot cider. "To our new friends," he exclaimed, his voice resonating through the crisp air. The gathered families echoed his toast, laughter mingling with the sound of falling snow. Mary, standing beside her husband, watched as the children, Sarah and Tommy, rushed to catch the snowflakes on their tongues. A soft smile graced her lips. She could feel the warmth of community enveloping them, a stark contrast to the biting cold that threatened their survival. As the night wore on, the settlers shared stories of their hardships and triumphs, reinforcing their bonds. Around a crackling fire, the elders spoke of past winters and the ingenuity that had led them through. They reminisced about the community's resilience, how they had learned to forage for herbs that kept illness at bay, and how the act of coming together to improve their bedding had cultivated a deeper sense of interdependence. The atmosphere was buoyant, but as the fire flickered, shadows loomed larger in the minds of some. The winter storms were often unpredictable, and while the alliance provided hope, it also brought worries about resource allocation. Would they have enough to share? Would conflicts arise as different traditions clashed? While the settlers celebrated, a gust of wind swept through the clearing, causing the flames to flicker wildly. John instinctively tightened his grip on Mary's hand. "We must prepare for what's to come," he said, his voice growing serious. The storm that had been hinted at in the weathered tales of old was no longer a mere fable. It was imminent. The following days were spent in a flurry of activity. Settlers exchanged goods and worked together to fortify their homes against the impending storms. They built snow barricades and reinforced roofs, stuffing gaps with straw and leaves. The communal spirit thrived as they helped each other, weaving a tapestry of support that would be crucial in the days to come. As the sun began to dip below the horizon on the third day of their preparations, the first real storm hit. Snow swirled violently, and the howling wind became an orchestra of nature's fury. The settlers huddled together, their homes dimly lit by flickering candles. Side her home, Mary sat beside the fire, with Sarah and Tommy nestled close. John had ventured out to check on their neighbors, leaving Mary to keep the children entertained. She told them stories of brave settlers who had once faced similar storms and emerged stronger on the other side. Each tale was woven with threads of bravery and hope, reminding them that even in the darkest times there was light to be found. As the night grew long, a loud crash echoed through the storm, sending a shiver down Mary's spine. She exchanged worried glances with Sarah and Tommy, her heart racing. "What was that?" Tommy whispered, his eyes wide with fear. Before she could answer, John stumbled back into the house, winded. "It's the barn," he said, breathless. "The roof couldn't take the weight of the snow." Mary's heart sank. The barn housed their livestock, their lifeblood through winter. Without it, their chances of survival weakened significantly. They quickly decided to rally the community. It was clear they were stronger together. Even in the storm's grasp, they determined to save what they could. John, Mary, and their children donned their thickest clothing and stepped back outside, braving the elements. The blizzard's icy fingers clawed at their skin, but the thought of their neighbors gave them strength. As they reached the barn, they found others already working to shore up the structure. Men and women stomped through the snow, pushing against the wind, determined to save their livelihoods. Together, they formed chains, passing straw and wooden beams from one person to another, bolstering the barn's integrity as best as they could. Hours passed, and exhaustion set in. Yet the warmth of camaraderie fueled them. They shared laughter and offered words of encouragement amidst their labor. Mary noticed how each person contributed in their own way. Some were strong enough to lift heavy beams, while others brought food and hot drinks to keep morale high. Finally, as dawn began to break, the storm began to relent. The snow, which had been a violent whirlwind, now fell gently, coating the earth in a thick blanket that glistened in the morning light. The barn was not entirely intact, but it was standing, and for the settlers, that was enough. As the community gathered outside, surveying their hard work and the snow-drenched landscape, they found solace in one another's eyes. They had faced a formidable challenge, yet together they had conquered it. John looked around and smiled, proud of what they had accomplished. "This is what our alliance is about," he said. "We can weather any storm as long as we stand together." With a renewed sense of purpose, they returned to their homes, knowing that winter was far from over, but believing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them united. The spirit of cooperation would continue to blossom, binding them even tighter as they readied themselves for the months to come. But as the last remnants of the storm melted away, a new worry crept into their minds. They had survived the storm, but what of the resources? Would their supply of food last until spring? With this thought hanging heavily in the air, the settlers began to discuss their next steps, unaware of the trials that awaited them down the road. And so, with the sun rising over the horizon, casting a warm glow over their settlement, the question lingered. Would the community's newfound alliance be enough to sustain them through the winter? Or would the harshness of nature test their bonds of unity once more? As the settlers embraced their new alliance and improved their sleeping conditions, they not only enhanced their individual well-being, but also strengthened the bonds within their community. The transition from makeshift bedding to more comfortable arrangements marked a significant step towards stability and health in their harsh environment. The face of adversity, the early American settlers showcased resilience and ingenuity, laying the groundwork for future generations. Their journey teaches us the importance of community and the impact of shared resources on survival and well-being, even in the most challenging of times.